Case numbers in Italy and Spain are absolutely exploding as well. The President of the United States finally talked about a very promising treatment that we first surfaced here a month ago. Hello, everyone. This is Chris Martenson here with your SARS-CoV-2, a.k.a. the honey badger virus update. That would be HB19, March 19th, 2020. I'm titling this one, Racing Against Time. This is day 56 of this reporting, and I think we've only missed 3 days out of that. So let's get right to the numbers. And here's what we're seeing. Apparently, China's all fixed. They should share their secrets with everybody. I'm very, very suspicious of these numbers, of course. And we are receiving more and more anecdotal evidence, data, whatever you call it, pieces coming out of China suggesting that it's not nearly as rosy as they're saying. And in fact, that they are having trouble with outbreaks happening over and over again. So no way I believe those numbers even slightly. But Italy, look at this, 5,000 new cases, half as many cases as China now. Many deaths here, surpassing the death total from China. Again, don't believe that for a second. And it's interesting here that the total recovered and serious critical and total deaths, when you look at this, there's just a lot of, maybe they're getting better at treating this, but I expected the serious critical case count to be a little bit higher. But with China, actually, if you take them at face value, they've been throwing on 33, 34, 17 cases like that for week after week now. And but still, they're reporting 2,200 serious critical people, showing that once you end up, maybe not showing, if I don't believe any of these numbers, why should I say that? But we do know that if you do end up in a hospital setting with us, you're in for a good long time, 20, 30 days, something like that. But look at all these countries now showing up with multiple thousands, and Spain really accelerating here. Germany, too. Very interesting, the super low death count in Germany. I do not have an explanation for that. Some of you have asked me about that. I don't understand why Germany only has 2 in serious or critical. I don't understand any of that. So if they've got a better treatment, they better share. I don't know what that means yet. My suspicion is that maybe Germany's been doing a good job testing. This virus, HB19, seems to have a really long, slow burn. So it comes into your country. Nothing much seems to be happening. I think people are harboring it for a good long time before it sort of blossoms and becomes a problem for them physically. United States now over the 10,000 mark here as well. I bet France will be too as soon as they report. They haven't reported at the time that I pulled these numbers. And finally, testing is coming online for the United States, and now we're seeing a much larger number than yesterday in terms of total cases per 1 million population. That number is going to shoot up quite a bit, as will the United Kingdom when they finally get their testing in order. But both countries had practiced don't test, don't tell pretty aggressively for a long time. South Korea showing, they're doing a great job here, and they've just been on top of this the whole way, but even still hard to contain. Again, makes me very suspicious of that number up there. And we're seeing the rest of Europe really come up the curve here and start to join in with those higher and higher numbers. So I want to focus on Spain for just a second because Charles N. had sent this to me through a private message earlier today, and I thought this really captured it very well, what's happening here. And he said that I could share this. So let's go here. Spain's explosion in cases and deaths was completely expected for well over a month. As you may well know, Spain is completely dependent on tourism. February, April is a critical period for the tourism industry locally, as there are many mass gatherings in the Spanish calendar during these dates that generate a lot of P&L, a lot of economic activity. That's profit and loss. Priority was given 100% to Q1 tourism profits over canceling several large gathering events. And we noted one of those back at the time, which was the Las Fallas, a massive 12-day festival in Valencia, 2.8 million tourists. Huge celebrations start at the beginning of March approximately. 8 Marzo, huge feminist march through Madrid, thousands cramming the streets, all these political rallies, campaigns, all of that other stuff. So he writes here, the scope of the pandemic was perfectly obvious abroad and locally, but as late as March 12th, so today's the 19th, 1 week ago, Spain was still in a state of denial. The Spanish government spun a misinformation and censorship campaign. Well, maybe they got Google or YouTube to help them out, like what we've had to fight here. Relying on the fact that most Spaniards do not read foreign English press and place far too much trust in government. Channels, Twitter accounts, interviews were blocked. They are still being blocked actively. mainstream media mimicked the government like mindless parrots. And in fact, I was interviewed by a journalist for one of the leading newspapers in Madrid, and he actually wrote a really good article, and his editor just canned all of it and took all of my quotes out, where I was talking about things that might have interfered with a couple of these things if people had read them, but turned out all to be all too accurate. The first recorded death was on February 13th, but they informed the public on March 3rd, a full 21 days later, which for an exponential honey badger virus, that's 21 days, 3 weeks. Come on, that's an eternity. That's terrible. This was obviously done so that Las Fallas of Valencia and many other large gatherings could continue without concern, seeing as the death took place in Valencia. Ooh. Only after several days of hundreds of thousands of tourists cramming the streets with no protection, Valencia is the top Spanish destination for, wait for it, Northern Italians. Did they announce the death from February 13th? The excuse for the 21 delay was absurd, claiming that it was a pneumonia of an unknown cause. And they could not conclude it was nCoV-2 in spite of the obvious context. They slyly did not want to link the death with coronavirus. So what happens when you're slow at this and you play the wrong game and you don't get on top of it and you don't block travel and all of that? Well, you get what's happening in Italy. This is from Matteo Salvini. You know, he was part of the head of the Five-Star Party there for a while. So a big politician in Italy tweeted out earlier today saying the army takes the coffins out of Bergamo for cremation out of Lombardy, a land put to the test, which fights relentlessly against evil. It's a heartbreaking image which hits with a force of 1,000 punches. These trucks are all loaded. And in fact, when we go to Italy and get some of this stuff that's sneaking out here now, let's look at this video here. And, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to stop that there. So this is just in a church, and we're seeing all of these coffins just lined up, and this is just, from a certain period of time. I don't know how many days they would leave them in there, but not too many days. So let's imagine it's no more than a couple of days. This is the amount of deaths maybe they're seeing on a daily basis. I don't know. I don't know what the frequency is, but and this is just in one church. And so the piece that I wanted to bring your attention to is what this person wrote, which I thought was exactly right. Continuous cycle cremations, coffins aligned with Christian care and piety in the churches waiting for a blessing, and a Spartan and arranged funeral. Today, we cry in pain. But sooner or later, someone will have to answer for all this. So, yeah, the authorities who really botched this, I think, they've lost the trust of their people, and that's a very bad thing. That brings us back to the fourth turning and everything that implies. When we look across the world, everything is still perfectly exponential, so I've drawn this little red line through the most recent data. If we were seeing this dropping off in any way, shape, or form, these dots would start falling below this line, maybe like that, okay? But we're not seeing that right now. They're all falling perfectly on the line, so this is remaining perfectly exponential. Again, their cases are doubling every 4.1 days. That means we have a tenfold increase approximately every 2 weeks. What about the summer will save us thesis? Well, it's kind of taken a hit. It's falling apart a little bit. So here we're looking at these charts from Nucleus Wealth. Total cases caught ex-China by season. We're caught. Yeah, you see that little tick up right there? You see that little, this is starting to increase right here. So let's zoom in on that a tiny bit. And what we see here is these are the winter month countries. So they're pretty much a straight line. And here we had the summer month countries were really doing nothing. But now all of a sudden, this is a straight line here for about the last, call that 2 weeks or so. So it looks like the summer equatorial countries are getting it. So these are places where the humidity's high, the temperature's high, and so we were hoping that we wouldn't be seeing any of domestic transmission like this, that, maybe they had cases because they were flying in from somewhere else, but this is showing that there is actually transmission happening in these countries. So maybe this coronavirus isn't going to respect that summer boundary. Maybe these, for whatever reason, the summer equatorial countries were just delayed a little bit, and now they're taking off. Maybe this is an anomaly, and it doesn't play out over the next couple of weeks, but it really looks like it's starting to spread in those summer equatorial countries. Maybe more slowly, we hope, but we'll have to just track the data a little bit more. For now, I think the summer will save us thesis is damaged, and it looks like it may not hold. I want to talk about this lung damage a little bit because, a lot of these people are saying, well, 80%, it's just mild, and only 2.3% or 3.2% or whatever numbers they want to throw around, 97% are fine, is not actually true because of what happens in the lungs of people who get this, and they survive, but in many cases there is quite a lot of trouble that forms. So this is from a pathologist, I believe, and it's in this Journal of Thoracic Oncology. Again, all of these links are here, but they're also going to be placed below this in a set of links that will accompany this video, so you can just click. These findings indicate that there is progressive consolidation of the lung, which is ultimately the cause of respiratory failure and death. Lung consolidation is not caused by the accumulation of granulocytes and fibrin, but rather by intra-alveolar organization and fibrosis. Therefore, since the respiratory surface of the lung is obliterated, these patients can no longer respond to intubation and oxygen therapy, and this is why they die. From this important report, we learned that the virus can establish infection in the lungs where it produces tissue injury well before producing symptoms, including dry cough and fever that occur later on. That's the damaging part right here, is that by the time people show up, we learned the virus maybe it's even before the symptoms have shown up, it's already doing the damage. This is why you would test, and then if you have any frontline therapies, we're going to talk about one in just a minute that we talked about a month ago, but we'll raise it up again because the President of the United States talked about it. But this is why if we really wanted to do the best things for people, because of this idea that you have lung damage starting even before producing symptoms, which is the dry cough and the fever, that you want to catch this as early as possible. And of course, this is replicating and mirroring what we reported a while ago from the Chinese data as well. You want to catch this disease as early as you possibly can. All right. At this early stage, the only clue of SARS-CoV-2 infection is imaging showing ground glass opacities in the periphery of the lung. These imaging findings are of particular relevance to identify infected individuals in the light of the evidence for viral spreading by asymptomatic patients, including by individuals which may test PCR negative even in the upper respiratory tract. So you might get false negatives here, meaning the person's actually positive, but your PCR test didn't do it. So what is the gold standard test? And this is what China confirmed a long time ago. Their gold standard that they were relying on were these CT scans in the lungs, where they would see these ground glass opacities, and then, boom, that was all they needed to see. They didn't necessarily need confirmation from a positive PCR test. Therefore, presently, any patient with glass opacities in the lung should undergo SARS-CoV-2 testing. All right. Only when the lesions become more intense or expand do patients develop symptoms. Often the first symptom is a dry cough. Most patients recover. However, some experience disease progression and their lungs contain large areas of consolidations, at which point there is severe loss of function leading to respiratory failure. And in fact, even when you recover, you may have permanent lung damage at that point, or at least very long-lasting lung damage. So this is why we would test, and you find people who've got it, and then you get into prophylactic treatment, which, again, we'll get to in just a second. I find this a very useful graphic. Somebody tweeted this for me, and I retweeted it as well, showing about this is how you flatten the curve. So this is a good graphic. And it says if you are one person and you're going to infect 2.5 people, right? And again, the R0 of this one might be 6.7. But let's just say it's 2.5 people. That happens in 5 days. In 30 days, because of you, 406 people have been infected. But what if we could take this, on average, take a person and have them have 50% less exposure to the world out there, all right? Well, then they're going to infect 1.25 people, which means after 30 days, you've got 15 people infected. Well, what if they had 75% less exposure? They instead of being outside every day, they were only outside every fourth day. So after 5 days, only 0.625 people have been infected, and after 30 days, just 2.5 people. That's the difference between keeping people in place and in quarantine or just moving around a lot less. 406 people versus 2.5. totally, night and day. So that is the power of social distancing. That is how we flatten the curve. We just minimize our contact. And of course, disheartening to see all the spring break videos. I'm sure you've seen them in pictures of college kids saying, this doesn't apply to me. And they're just down there partying 3 feet away from each other and just having a grand old time, which I understand. I was there. I've been there, done that. But it's highly irresponsible given this data right here. All right. Here's why you start a garden. Why? Because the pandemic will last 18 months or longer. A leaked U.S. government report warns that this first came out in the New York Times. This is on the 18th, just picking this up in Ars Technica because I found this to be a useful summary of that summary. All right, the U.S. government is reportedly preparing for the coronavirus pandemic to last 18 months or longer and result in significant shortages for government, private sector, and individual U.S. consumers. A 100-page U.S. government plan was leaked to the New York Times and published an article summarizing the highlights. A federal government plan to combat the coronavirus warned policymakers last week that a pandemic will last 18 months or longer, could include multiple waves, resulting in widespread shortages that would strain consumers and the nation's healthcare system. All right, so that 18-month figure is in line with best case estimates of how long it would take to develop a vaccine and make it widely available. This could lead to millions of deaths in the U.S. and UK during this period of time. But social distancing, other containment measures could limit the death toll. All right, so that's why you start a garden, because we just don't know how long this is going to last, and I could easily foresee, this is a super easy prediction to make, that if people are no longer working in the fields, to harvest the lettuce from California, you're probably going to be running out of fresh veggies and things like that after this first growth cycle. So we'll just have to watch and see what happens. But I'm a little worried right now about what could happen to the food production systems in the United States. All right. So the president of the United States, Trump, came out and talked about chloroquine, phosphate. I think he just mentioned chloroquine, which is an anti-malarial drug. And so here's what Forbes came out with just yesterday on the 18th. They published this, and they said, while unpublished yet, the first patient trial of Plaquenil, which is actually hydroxychloroquine, for COVID-19 conducted in Marseille, France, has reported encouraging early results. The trial, announced in a video on Monday, was led by Didier Raoult, a physician scientist who's published on microbes for several decades. So I guess, hey, it's a Westerner. We're going to listen to it, right? Because I'll tell you why that's important in a second. According to a draft article by Raoult's team and obtained by me, 36 patients were enrolled in the trial, including 16 infected controls and 20 treated patients. The test group was given 600 milligram a day of Plaquenil, which is on the WHO's list of essential medicines, and has been used for malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, and lupus. At day 3, the study reported 50% of the treated group turned from positive to negative for the virus. By day 6, 70% tested negative. Well, that's really amazing. So it looks like it really works and knocks the disease down, and it's a very common, very easily made drug. So this is all very encouraging. As intriguing, of the 20 test patients, 6 who were treated with both Plaquenil and the antibiotic azithromycin did even better, the team reported. An antibiotic, right? So that works against bacteria. I'll show you why I think this is important here in just a sec. 5 of the 6, or 83%, tested negative at day 3. All 6, 100%, tested negative at day 6. That is good news. Now, why did I downplay? I mean, it's good that this is coming out, but I got to be honest. We found this way back in early February, and here this was in vitro. So this was a study in cells and culture, but it was encouraging enough that it immediately led to Chinese trials, which were then reported on shortly thereafter. So remdesivir and chloroquine effectively inhibit the recently emerged novel coronavirus. This is chloroquine right here. This is the phosphate version of it. And so their curves, they were testing all these different things. I just pulled a few of them. So this antiviral right here, what they found was, look, it inhibited really well because the inhibition is in the pink dots, got up to 100% inhibition, but look at the cell toxicity. Went from 0 to about a 60% toxicity level. At the highest dose, I mean, it was still 30% toxic. Remdesivir looked great, hits 100% right here effectiveness, and it's very safe on the cells way back here. But same thing for chloroquine, hits 100% inhibition, and maybe it's even cytoprotective, because this is the zero line right here, and every one of these dots is below that zero line. So maybe it's actually cellular protective in some way, shape, or form. So that was on the 4th of February, and we published this at the time when it came out. This is February 20th, and Chinese experts, based on results of clinical trials, have confirmed that chloroquine phosphate, an anti-malarial drug, has certain curative effect on the novel coronavirus disease. These experts have unanimously suggested the drug be included in the next version of the treatment guidelines, which it was, and applied in wider clinical trials as soon as possible. Chloroquine phosphate has been around for more than 70 years, was selected from tens of thousands of existing drugs after multiple rounds of screening. So they did this sort of in vitro stuff, said what works against this thing, and selected this and put it into trials. February 20th, today's the 19th, that's a month ago. We had this data a month ago, right? So it's being splashed all over Western press as if this French guy had and no disrespect, I'm sure he's amazing, but as if he discovered something. But I got to tell you, this has been out for a month, and the Chinese had it out there. So yeah, look at this, February 19th, exactly 1 month ago. And so these people had, and this is in PubMed, right? So this wasn't like hidden behind some Chinese, medical journal paywall or anything. This was out in the public thing here at NCBI. So this was public, and we reported on this one as well at the time. The coronavirus disease is spreading rapidly. Scientists are endeavoring to discover drugs for its efficacious treatment in China. Chloroquine phosphate, an old drug for treatment of malaria, is shown to have apparent efficacy and acceptable safety. Okay, so that's what you want. It's efficacious and it's safe. And multi-center clinical trials conducted in China. It wasn't just a single trial. It's like everywhere. Even by the February 19th, it's already been proven out in multi-center clinical trials. And so that's a month ago, right? And hydroxychloroquine, oops, another typo right there. So this is again by the same people who did this first one up here. See these names? Jialu here, right? Running the same thing. There they are, lead author on this one. So this is hydroxychloroquine, very similar molecule, just couple slight changes in it. Is a less toxic derivative of chloroquine, is effective in inhibiting SARS-CoV-2 infection in vitro. This is Plaquenil. This is the stuff actually that you would find in the Plaquenil compound. It's hydroxychloroquine. All right, if you want to know how those work as well, this PubMed, here's the best science. I won't try and repeat it because it's already been done. The MedCram lectures, really great stuff coming up. Dr. Seholt here had this a month ago. Same time we did. He was noting these antiviral drugs, treatment trials, remdesivir and chloroquine. So this was already known. And then if you want to understand how this works, great science in there explaining that this allows zinc to get inside the cell, where the zinc can interfere with the virus's replication machinery, and that's a great thing. Because again, how these viruses work, it's a little package of material, it's a little package of information, it's packaged in an RNA form, so that's messenger RNA, positive sense, meaning you read it the front ways, it doesn't have to get reverse read first like HIV does or something like that, and which are called retroviruses. So this is a positive sense mRNA. So the first thing it has to do is it has to hijack the cell's machinery for mRNA to get read, and when as it's being read, it's turning that into proteins. So there's lots of ways to interfere with that. What I found interesting is that azithromycin, I didn't know this till I looked it up, or Zithromax is its common name. Azithromycin prevents bacteria from growing by interfering with their protein synthesis. It binds to the 50S subunit of the bacterial ribosome, thus inhibiting translation of mRNA. Nucleic acid synthesis not affected. So it's binding in here. Maybe it's somehow binding on the human ribosomal subunit as well, and is preventing this mRNA from being read out and being turned into a protein. Because that's what a ribosome does, is it reads this thing and assembles proteins out of these amino acid building blocks. So maybe, I don't know. Otherwise, I'm just taking a stab at the dark. I'll wait for other experts to come in and weigh in on what might actually be happening there. But if we had both Zithromax and Chloroquine widely available right now, that should be used in every frontline treatment. In fact, people should be going in as soon as they suspect they've got this thing, getting that CT scan. If they have any ground glass opacities in their lungs, boom, on you go. Here, we're going to start a chloroquine and or hydroxychloroquine and then a azithromycin prophylaxis treatment, and you should have a much better outcome than if that didn't happen. I also got asked a bunch about this because this splashed around, and I had to hunt for a while to find out where it came from, this idea that ibuprofen makes it worse and that you shouldn't take ibuprofen. So this came from, ultimately, a French health minister said this, this March 17th. So this is the earliest I could find about this. And the French government, well, actually the minister, I'm not sure it was the whole government, warned that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as ibuprofen could result in grave adverse effects in those suffering from HB19. So while ibuprofen is often many people's go-to medication for feeling sick, it might be counterproductive during the ongoing coronavirus outbreak. According to an announcement by the French health minister Olivier Véran over social media, anti-inflammatory painkiller drugs such as ibuprofen, also known as Motrin or Advil, and cortisone could simply make the coronavirus worse by aggravating it. So I went and hunted, and I couldn't find any sort of data to back this up. Just this idea that it could result in grave adverse effects. And just understand, the French have a very different view of ibuprofen. It's not available over the counter. It's behind the counter. So they haven't liked ibuprofen for a while. So I'm not clear on what's happening here. Some researchers, this article goes on to note, have cast doubt on this information, saying there's no scientific evidence I'm aware of that it causes worse outcomes. I couldn't find any evidence for that either. Dr. Anthony Fauci, one of the faces of Trump administration's coronavirus response, who I trust, actually, I think he's a good guy, is pushing back against warnings that an anti-inflammatory drug like ibuprofen could worsen the infection. He says that maybe it's a little bit of an urban legend. There's no solid evidence to support the theory that the French health minister put forward. And he says here, I think it was a conflating of some medical issues. Maybe true, may not. But there's no good scientific evidence that says ibuprofen can make coronavirus worse. So at any rate, we don't, question mark. I don't know anything here to rule one way or the other. I'd love to see some data. All right, moving on into markets just for a second here. U.S. unemployment claims, not a surge, explode higher. What can we say? So check this out. It's resulting in a surge in newly laid off workers. It's so high that it's crashing states' unemployment websites. In Ohio, more than 48,000 people applied for jobless benefits during the first 2 days of this week, 26 times the amount from the week before. 226. Yeah, basically a year's worth of people showing up in a single 2-day period. In neighboring Pennsylvania, 70,000 people sought unemployment aid in a single day, 6 times the total for the entire previous week. In Kentucky, state's unemployment assistance site and phone lines went down amid a 4-fold surge in applications. Probably would have been higher if they hadn't gone down, right? Oregon's unemployment website went down Monday, just as the state's governor was announcing a closure of bars and restaurants. And New York State on Tuesday received 21,000 calls from people asking about unemployment benefits, a 10-fold increase from the week before, on and on and on. This is happening in every state in the union right now. And it's just, this is like Great Depression sort of territory that we're talking about here. This is astonishing, this amount of slowdowns that are happening and job losses already. So right now, though, we're in the midst of an early stages of a gigantic financial calamity that's happening. So I know Janet Yellen said in 2017 that there wouldn't be another financial crisis in anybody's lifetime, but we have one now. So that's 3 years ago. So here we are, and one of the things that one of the signs for that is watching the dollar surge. So I'm watching all these different subcomponents. So I don't watch the whole stock market. I watch pieces of it rather, because those give me a better sense of what's actually happening. So I showed some of that before, showing like watching insurance companies, health insurance companies, interest rate sensitive thing, banks. So watching the financial system. But at any rate, Right now, the dollar is on a tear. The Aussie dollar is at 55 cents to the dollar, and the world's desperate for dollars here. This is from today in the Wall Street Journal. Soaring demand for the dollar is exacerbating dislocations in markets around the world, sending other currencies tumbling, pressuring companies and investors that need U.S. currency to pay off debts and meet other obligations. That's true. And I'll show you some data in a second that shows just how many of these foreign companies and countries have borrowed in dollars. So if the dollar goes up in price, that makes it a lot harder. I mean, imagine if you had borrowed money in a different currency and that was at 1-to-1, and all of a sudden that other currency was worth twice what your currency was worth. Now your cost of servicing your debt just went up by a factor of 2. It's very bad. And their explanation here, though, is a little wanting. They said Thursday as investors dumped acid and paid dearly to swap local currencies into U.S. dollars. That's because of something called a carry trade. We knew that there was a big structural synthetic short on the dollar. And to decode that, what it means is that companies would borrow dollars and then go and take those dollars and sell them, say, in overseas and buy Australian dollars. So the first thing they do is buy Australian dollars. Why? Because they could actually buy Australian sovereign debt yielding a much higher rate of interest than they could get back in the United States. So they would do that. It's called a carry trade because what they're doing is they're looking for all of the interest that they can carry across that and by playing different markets off of each other. So dollars were borrowed. They were sold. So that actually drives the dollar down. And then they bought the say in this case, the Australian dollar, that drives that dollar up. And then they would buy those Australian bonds. That's all well and good until you suddenly realize those dollars you borrowed in the first place have to be paid back. What do? You reverse that whole thing. So you sell the Australian debt. You sell the Australian currency, which starts to drive it down. You buy a dollar, that drives it up in price, and you bring those dollars back and you pay off your debts. All right. So it was just February 20th of this year where we got this headline: emerging market businesses binge on U.S. dollar bonds. So gosh, how do people get so dumb right before things get so bad? It happens all the time. Emerging market companies sold a record amount of foreign currency debt this year, mostly U.S. currency debt, taking advantage of low rates and investors' appetite for better returns despite warnings about the growing risks of a global borrowing binge. So this thing was really in just, after rocket super burner thing going on. Afterburner, that's what I meant to say. Super rocket afterburner. About $66 billion of bonds denominated in U.S. dollars, euros, and other currencies have been sold this year by non-financial businesses in countries such as China, Mexico, Chile. That is almost double the $34 billion raised in the first 7 weeks of last year, and the highest ever for the period, which is traditionally a busy time for issuance. The growing debt pile leaves companies vulnerable to any stark appreciation in those foreign currencies like the dollar, which would drive up the cost of interest payments. Businesses that rely on domestic operations, such as real estate firms, are particularly susceptible. So let's see what happened to the dollar. Uh-oh. Look at that massive, massive appreciation. That's the scramble for dollars. That's an astonishing thing to see the major currency in the world appreciate that much in that short amount of time. And it sends shockwaves across places like this. These are all the emerging markets. That's what EMs means, who've borrowed. They have U.S. dollar denominated debt. So for this, what's that? About $3.5 trillion of debt is denominated in dollars. And that $3.5 trillion in debt just suddenly got a lot more expensive at a very bad time when many of these companies are going to be, of course, hurting for the same reasons that the economy is hurting everywhere right now. So this is a really bad, toxic combination where you have the dollar scooting up like that and you have trillions of dollars of debt denominated in dollars. So looking here, China's got 500 billion, Russia's got a couple hundred billion, but it's Asia, ex-China, that has 2.1 trillion. So that's all the rest of the Asian countries. Argentina, just forget about it. Brazil, forget about it. So we've already seen a lot of these currencies really get hit, and that's going to be creating another financial crisis at this point. Remember, this is not the flu. We've known all these things for 50 plus days, and we've known all of this right now. And it's just astonishing to see that countries like Spain, like Italy, like the United States now, like the UK, Canada, Australia still, many countries just still pretending as if they've got time in this story, but, we're coming close to the time in most of these other countries where this is going to get played out over and over again. And if we'd gotten data and images were allowed to come out of China, we would have seen that too. China just snuck crematoriums into Wuhan and said they were animal incinerators or some nuts like that. All right, conclusions for today. Yeah, a lot of countries are just being managed really poorly. And, that's just, I can't put any nicer spin on it than that. If I were in charge, though, we'd have chloroquine, we'd have azithromycin. We would have started on that over a month ago when I didn't know about the azithromycin till more recently, but the chloroquine for sure a month ago. And I'd have every available person in this country or any country with a sewing machine who knows how to use one making masks, all right? And is it going to be perfect? No, but we would do that from the best materials available, even if we have to use furnace filters, even if we have to use vacuum cleaner bags, whatever the material is. That's what we'd be doing until our fast-track manufacturing came online in a few weeks. And I'd be really clear about it. I would say, here's how long it's going to take. Here's how fast we're building these factories. Here's the bottlenecks that we have. When we finally do get professionally made masks coming off of factory lines, here's who they go to first. Here's how we're going to fulfill that. Here's how the hospitals get that, our frontline defenders. Then it goes to our most vulnerable in the population. And then after that, we'll find out how you can get a hold of them in your community. As well, we would be doing that for everything, chloroquines with max. I'd just clear communication about how the things that can help, how those are going to get out there. Because again, if once everybody's wearing a mask, we can all lighten up a little bit and get out of our houses. But as long as we're still being dummies and people aren't wearing masks and spring breakers are spring breaking and people are coughing on each other and we're not decontaminating public surfaces like railings and things like that, we have to you just got to hide out because there's not much else you can do. And as well, I would say I would want money would be pouring into small and medium-sized enterprises. I would have all copays and deductibles covered, as well as hospital stays for people who get this thing, and anybody who's out of a job, get them on a 75% salary. And guess what? Zip, nothing for dumb corporations that ruin their own balance sheets, right? Nothing. If we lose a couple of companies as a consequence, that's fine. Better run companies can come along and not do that again. So I don't agree with making little people suffer the consequences of this and bailing out the big dumb corporations who should have known better because they got really expensively salaried people who ought to have been able to advise them better. Regardless of what we do, life has now changed forever. It's just what we had was not coming back. I wrote an article back last March, I think, called These Are the Good Old Days, talking about what was going to happen when the financial accident that we all knew was coming finally arrived. And it would just change life forever because we can't live on borrowed money forever. And eventually that was going to mathematically run into trouble. Well, it ran into a honey badger virus and ran into a different sort of trouble. Didn't see that coming, but knew something like that was coming. At any rate, we have a new future in front of us, and it's going to be very different. So the sooner we can wrap our minds, our hearts around that, the faster and the better we'll be, I think, at adjusting. Otherwise, and as long as you live in a country with a bunch of dummy managers, not actual leaders out there, you're kind of on your own. Every community is a little bit on their own. And it really didn't have to be this way. Really didn't. Not on any of these dimensions. We could have been smart, logical, thoughtful, compassionate a long time ago. But that's not the direction my country went, certainly. And so here we are, and hopefully what good can come of this will include a return to integrity, a return to honor, a return to logic, a return to rational, reasonable debates, and coming to better conclusions and decisions. So it didn't have to be this way, and hopefully it won't have to be this way in the future. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Hi, folks. Adam Taggart here. Chris Martinson and I are the co-founders of Peak Prosperity. If you want to get alerted whenever we release a new video from Chris, just click the red subscribe button right beneath the YouTube video player. Once you've done that, a little bell icon will appear right next to it. Click on that bell. It looks like this. And that's it. The next time we publish a video from Chris, you'll immediately receive a notification from YouTube. Thanks for watching our videos.